Be careful, you're gonna knock
Yeah,
your
I
camera
see it. I
over.
see it.
And good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Friday, June the 24th, 2022. And yes, we are in New Orleans, Louisiana, the site of the 195th anniversary conference of the Black Press of America. And we have such a wonderful gathering, even this morning, starting with James Wright of the Washington Informer. Special guest, Mark Make It Plain Thompson, the one and only Asar Walker, the Houston Defender, Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times, the associate publisher. Joy is turning the reins over. And then, of course, my favorite colleague of all time, the wonderful, the spectacular, Marilyn Raines. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is good to be here, isn't it? I mean, have you been to a better conference, James?
No, and I've been to some great alpha conventions, but really this is best.
I noticed how you do that. Nobody asked about my alphas. We got other people watching too.
Well.
But you know, today, we're going to talk a little bit about a panel that Assad is going to be on today. It's the antidote to racism, and so much is going on with that, as we well know. But before we get into that, a couple of big rulings came down yesterday from the Supreme Court, and I think we need to talk about that. First being your Miranda rights now. The Supreme Court ruled that a police officer cannot be held liable civilly and virtually otherwise if he or she fails to read you your Miranda rights. They've limited it now to that use of it in a criminal trial. You can't necessarily say, well, he didn't read me my rights. I'm gonna start with you, Mark. This is an incredible ruling because it just eliminates something that we've all known to be. You watch Law and Order, you watch, Blue Bloods. First thing is you have a right to remain silent.
Yeah, no. This court, it's interesting. This court is very it's got more and more self-serving. It protects itself, and you can't separate one decision from another. It is threatening to take away the rights of women to privacy, not just abortion. Roe was about privacy.
Yep.
It is also yesterday made it easier for people to get more guns.
Yep.
In an environment where people are shooting each other to death.
Right.
And then it says, well, basically, anything can happen to you. You can also forfeit your Miranda rights. You don't have a right to appeal or sue if you aren't properly Mirandized. So this court has run completely amok, and really, it ties into the January 6th hearings.
Absolutely.
January 6th we know our democracy has been under attack. It's been under attack for many years, and usually it's under attack through the attack on our right to vote as African Americans. But January 6th crystallized it in that moment. And so ever since then, this court represents the insurrectionists. It represents insurrectionist number one in Donald Trump. So that is why it is going buck wild.
Yeah.
And when would how can a court make these types of decisions in this environment? It's appalling. Clarence Thomas needs to go. Brett Kavanaugh needs to go. But yet they can't pass laws to protect our voting rights. They can't pass laws to prevent guns from killing us. But they can pass laws to put extra security around the Supreme Court that is undermining democracy.
It's an amazing point right there because after the Texas shooting at school, 19 kids were murdered, 2 teachers were murdered. The reaction was just talk, right? But when a justice life was threatened a couple of weeks ago, they immediately acted. They immediately said, we're beefing up security. And it went through Congress. It went through Congress probably within an hour. That's what it felt like anyway, no more than that. Asad, what message are we getting?
The message we're getting is that Barry Goldwater won, the insurrectionists won, hell, the Confederacy has won, because everything that they had worked for all those years, we see it coming to pass right here and right now. And I like the way the Reverend put it, that we need to trace the roots of this ruling back to this. I would say we have to go back even further, right? Because Barry Goldwater, his, the whole silent majority, the approach of, I can't remember, it was their strategy to take over the South, using disgruntled Dixiecrats to come over to their party. That whole thing was all about recognizing the world is changing. We don't want to give equal rights to these people of color, so we're going to do anything humanly possible. We say we love democracy, but we're going to work in very undemocratic ways to make sure that we maintain power, and that's just a continuation of that same vein.
Well, you mentioned democracy, Paris. Democracy it's been an assault on democracy, and really we can say an all-out war on democracy.
It is, and I agree with Assad. I mean, they're using the entire democratic process, legislative, judiciary, right, and to really disenfranchise not only blacks. Now, what's happening? This is going to spill over. Sometimes our counterparts think, oh, we're just doing this for blacks. No. This affects you too, disproportionately. Yes, it does affect us when you talk about the Miranda rights. When you look at how many of us are arrested, and they're young, and so they will talk, right? So now they're saying, okay, let's remove that so they can incriminate themselves. Let's make it even easier for us to do what we want to do, right? And so it is an attack on our democracy.
And you think about, we talk about how these little kids and 2 teachers were killed, and they're still debating. The Senate actually, they just agreed on a bipartisan gun law, and yet with the Supreme Court, as we said, it was was it Kavanaugh? Who was it? It was Kavanaugh, yeah. And immediately Congress acted. These kids, these little babies, they were 3rd graders, 4th graders in some cases. So we're talking 9 and 10 years old, gunned down in a place where it's supposed to be sacred. It's supposed to be, safe and secure. And Marilyn, you've taught for years. I'm sure, like all of us, it affected you. But as a teacher, to see something like that, so talk about that a little bit, if you will.
It's heartbreaking, and so the guns, the mass shootings have always shocked us. Like, it's like a shock and awe. But I was researching about gun violence in schools, and I learned that 311,000 students have been shot in school since Columbine. Not in a mass shooting, but just individual here and there. So guns have always been.
How many? Say it again.
311,000
Since
students
Columbine.
since Columbine in the past 23 years. So it's something that teachers are acutely aware of. We don't really talk about it. When I taught in Chicago, I would hear gunfire outside my classroom.
Wow.
During the day. And there's been times where, you don't want to say, okay, get on the floor, but you just kind of keep going because you don't want to break the panic. There have been times at recess where there's been shootings and we have to move the kids into the building. So guns, they're an ever-present threat. People with, shootings. And so the mass shootings, it just brings it to the forefront of what's already kind of percolating as you're teaching in certain communities. I think the biggest thing is happening in communities where, like, Uvalde is like a small town, Newtown, Connecticut. So just like with drugs, like we've had that problem in our community now, white people, middle class white people are seeing it come to their neighborhood. So I think when we talk about Miranda rights, it feels like it's like an attack on blacks. As you said, Paris, white kids do crime all the time, and if they don't need those Miranda rights too,
Exactly.
And then it's gonna be like, oh, we need it back. So it's just a mess.
I just do crime all the time. Look at the statistics. They do more crime than we do.
They do.
But
Yes.
ours is brought to the forefront, and it's unfortunate because only the mass shootings, because I understand if it's only a certain number that is shot when they talk about the school,
Yes.
then it makes the news. So you need a minimum amount of kids to be killed for it to make the news. It's
Right,
crazy.
four is a
Four.
mass
So if it's
shooting.
not four,
Right,
they get killed, no one knows about it.
right.
Can I
Go
speak to that point? Because I think it's important what Paris said, and what Maryland picked up on, how it spills over.
Yeah.
Dr. King talked about, he gave a speech where he talked about us seeking our freedom will ultimately even set white folks free. And folks didn't understand what he was saying. We all are, he said, we all are inextricably linked in this mutual garment of destiny. So the face of poverty has always been black, the face of crime has always been black. That is why the black press is important, because we've been trying to reverse that. There was a study done in Philadelphia recently about how the advent of local news, the local news as we know it today, the action news, the eyewitness news type formats, were built around if it bleeds, it leads, and the stories lead with black crime and all of that. And it has allowed white America to think that they're safe, even from themselves. And so a lot of these shootings happening in white communities, people are like, oh, we never heard it. Well, yeah, it does happen. And you need to know about it. And you also have drugs. But I think it's very important. I always remind people, I encourage people to Google Professor Carl T. Bogus, Bogus. He's written the hidden history of the Second Amendment. And he has Supreme Court upholding an amendment that is rooted in enslavement. People are dying today in America for gun violence because of an amendment that is rooted in the period of enslavement. Meaning the Second Amendment, people think that, oh, we need the right to keep their arms because the British might invade us and the government might come take our guns. No. Read his research and read what's documented, even the words of Patrick Henry. The right to keep their arms, they felt it was necessary because of us. Another part of our history is not reported on, the number of slave insurrections that were taking place around that time. We were overthrowing plantation owners. We were killing white people to get our freedom. Patrick Henry said, we need to keep their arms to stop these black folk who are overrunning us on these plantations. They're not as easily controlled as the perception would have. And so that's what the Second Amendment is rooted in. And I think if more people understood that they're being killed in schools to uphold an amendment that was rooted in keeping us enslaved, they would have an entirely different perspective on it.
Yeah, I just want the audience to know that we will take your questions too in your comments, so feel free. Good morning, David Youngblood. It's always good to see David. David is a loyal patron of the Black Press of America. We appreciate it. And you know, I always like to say hi to my little sis, the newest doctor. Marilyn is going to get her doctorate, PhD soon. And my little sister got her PhD a couple of weeks ago, so I'm happy. Dr. Nicole McDaniel's on me. But so let's talk more about it, because what you said, Paris, you mentioned like as Mark articulated, so many important things there. But Mark was talking early about Roe v. Wade and other rights. On this program, we've talked about that when that document first leaked. We cautioned about other rights. See, the Republicans, you know, and not to take a side, we're nonpartisan, right?
Right.
But they throw rocks and hide their hand. There's a lot more to Roe v. Wade than just abortion. And the side shaking said, I know James, Mr. Historian, talk about that too.
Well, let me just say this about this decision that I had a chance to look at it just a little bit. Horribly written. It was written by Clarence Thomas.
Are we talking about the gun one?
I got you. Yeah, the gun one. Yeah.
Right. Oh my God.
And see, my thing is, this is why I'm so happy that Ketanji Brown Jackson is getting on the Supreme Court, because we will have a justice as a people who can write, think logically, think cogently.
He had a black justice. We don't have a black justice on Supreme Court.
Yeah, I hear you.
Right. It's like there's not it's just like there's not a Democrat majority in the Senate. Right.
Mm-hmm. You know,
that's right.
And the thing about it is, he had a sentence that said that the Second Amendment is not a secondary right. What has that got to do with anything? You have a decision that just basically watered down Miranda, which protects criminal defendants against overly police. And you're talking about a secondary right. Nobody said anything about that.
So
We
but you
need
think
a new
about that,
justice.
we do, and you think about that though, right? That Miranda rights, it's to protect you from saying something. They're gonna turn it the way they want it twisted anyway, right? But it protects you from having to say anything, right? And one of the most sacred rights, I've always said this, is the right to remain silent, because they do, particularly in our community, if you say anything, they truly will use that against you, no matter the intention. So taking the Miranda rights away is really, Greer, our fabulous producer, we were talking about this earlier, and she says, what this is that they are preparing for war against us and against brown people. That's what this is about, right? Many people believe, not just Greer, right? Because we know that Roe v. Wade, the moment that became the law of the land, the Republicans began to attack it. They began to plot to get rid of it. It took almost 50 years, but it shows you too. What does that show you about? They're very tenacious.
It's strategic.
And yeah, you're right.
Strategic. But and that's where, we need to get our house in order. Unlike the NNPA, it's been around for 195 years, folks. Black Press 195 year anniversary this year. There's a difference, and this is why November is important. There's a difference when people are focused and, in the words of Frederick Douglass, eternally vigilant. It took 50 years. A lot of us, we feel like, well, we voted for Democrats in 2020, we ain't get nothing, so we just not gonna vote. At 2 years.
Right.
They were patient for 50 years, didn't give up, and are now about to reverse a ruling that would take away women's own rights over their own bodies. So that's, we ought to think about that. And frankly, in terms of our struggle as a people, we need to remind ourselves every day, many of the victories we gained didn't come in 2 years. All the victories that we've gained as a people in the civil rights movement and human rights movement were victories that were over, a long period of time. We were enslaved for centuries before we were free. I was talking to somebody last night. We were having a debate in the after party last night when I was up too late. They'll never give us reparations. If people had that attitude during the period of enslavement, they never would have fought. So each generation is handed down to pick up that baton and continue to fight. I just want to say this. I found something. He reminded me of something. How crazy Clarence Thomas is. We know that, but I'm going to be very specific. In the ruling yesterday on guns, this is what he wrote, which validates what I said at a later date, that was said at a later date about African Americans owning guns. This is what Clarence Thomas wrote in the opinion. Y'all not gonna believe this. He wrote, even before the Civil War commenced in 1861, the court indirectly affirmed the importance of the right to keep and bear arms in public. Then Clarence Thomas quotes one of the most hideous cases in Supreme Court history. He says, writing for the court in Dred Scott, this is a black man,
Oh, wow.
quoting, using Dred Scott.
That is crazy.
This is a black man using Dred Scott. Well, not black man, but this is Clarence Thomas, Jen Thomas's husband, using Dred Scott. He says, writing for the court in Dred Scott v. Sam, I'm gonna show this. James gonna see this while I'm reading it so he can believe it. Chief Justice Chaney offered what he thought was a parade of horribles that would result from recognizing that free blacks were citizens of the United States. He said if blacks were citizens, the Chief Justice fretted, they would be entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizens, including the right to keep and bear arms wherever they went. Thus, even Chief Justice Chaney recognized, albeit unenthusiastically in the case of blacks, that public carry was a component of the right to keep and bear arms, a right free blacks were often denied in antebellum America. So Taney is upholding the fear of blacks owning guns in a Dred Scott decision that Clarence Thomas is now using to justify there being more guns on the street.
Well, listen, David Youngblood says that the striking down of Roe goes so much further than bodily autonomy. It's about control of blacks, gays, interracial marriage, and raising your children, etc. And that was the thing too, Assad, that we pointed out a couple of months ago on this program. In that bill, in that law, interracial marriage. So they want to do away with even that.
All of it.
And so the whole thing is like a playbook to turn the United States into South Africa. You know, that whole minority rule.
Yeah.
They
Apartheid.
reckon, you know, the die has been cast. There is no stopping the demographic changes, but what they can change is how power is delineated, right? And so they say we're all about democracy, all about democracy. Well, when our voices are the predominant voices, oh hell, we need to change democracy.
Mhm.
So democracy isn't sacred. We already know their supposed belief in Christianity isn't sacred, and we also know when they say that they are pro police. Hell, they were killing police January 6th. And not only that, the number one uh, perpetrators of violence against police have been white nationalists. And so all these things that they say are sacrosanct, are sacred to them, are not. And so democracy is just a word to them. Power is the real word.
And Mark said twice now that Clarence Thomas isn't black, right? And we talk about interracial marriage. His wife, Jeannie, of course, is a white woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it just shows you the mindset. We talked about this. I often mention Greer. I don't know if she likes me to mention her or not. She probably doesn't, but I have to mention it because we talked about this situation where there were people who look like us that are not. What was that? Skin folk. Skin folk. Well, we mentioned Clarence Thomas. Yeah, we mentioned Clarence Thomas. We mentioned Ben Carson. We mentioned Candace Owens. What happens to people? You know, they have when it all comes down to it. Ben Carson will be expendable. Candace Owens will be expendable. Herschel Walker will certainly be expendable. What happens? I want to get the black women's perspective because nobody's more knowledgeable. Nobody's more, in tune than the black woman. So let's get the black women on this, right?
I would agree with you. We are more knowledgeable and in tune.
Yeah, black women
Get
great.
credit. Huh. What do you think?
I gotta think about this one. What do we call them?
Well, okay. So we're not a monolith because we're black, right? We have different views on life. I think that for me personally, I am pro-life. Having had multiple, miscarriages in my life, I understand like that connection as a life, as a human being. But I also understand the struggle with the debate too. It's very nuanced. And I also feel that there's a lot of hypocrisy when you deal with the medical rights. So when you look at COVID, right? There was all this backlash against vaccinations, against even wearing a mask. You can't tell me what to put on my body. And a lot of that came from the right. And I'm like, well, you can't say that in the same vein as saying a woman can't get an abortion. Like, we're just asking you to wear a mask and you're like shouting down the governor. And that's on the external part of your body. You can take it off. So I can see like all the hypocrisy that we talked about. It's not consistent. And we can't have a decent conversation about logic and like, let's just reason together. Let's come on, because everybody is so political. They're just trying to like get power. And so when it comes to who's black and who's not and all that stuff, I'm like, what do you really believe? Like, really, what are your incentives of what you're saying? What are they? And a lot of times it is monetary. It is just like, I'm going to say, I'm going to be this person because I'm getting this out of it. Even at the detriment of your own people.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I have. I don't have a problem with you disagreeing with me.
Exactly.
But I have a problem with the incentive, your motivation for doing it, because I know it's really not authentic.
Right.
and you're harming people just so you can benefit. And it's hard to get to that place where we can actually disagree or have intellectual conversations that's not rooted in you just trying to get the better hand, just get the one up. You know, at some point we got to care about our community and moving us all forward and what the path is for that, as instead of like, well, how much am I going to get paid? Because I mean, because I do hold some conservative values, I see, and some liberal values. Let me just make it plain. I see people trying to use me all the time, especially from the Christian side, you know, be their puppet. And I'm like, well, I agree with that, but I'm not gonna stand on this. And it's like, well, even one person told me, your kids won't have to, you don't have to worry about putting your kids through college because, you know, I got you. And I said, what made you think I was worried about putting my kids through college? I'm not dependent on you to put my kids through college.
But you know what's interesting too, when we talk about people like Candace Owens, and we talk about people like Ben Carson. I mean, Herman Cain basically gave his life for Donald Trump, and Donald Trump didn't even recognize.
Didn't go to the funeral.
Didn't even go to the funeral. But you know, then I think about this, Paris, Meghan Markle, right? Over there in Great Britain, at least I'll give them this. At least they let her know she's not welcome.
Exactly. So I'm going to summarize it like this. We have an op-ed page. That's where all the different opinions. But one thing that is very clear, we know who they are, right? Yeah. we know their opinions. So we know who's, and you mentioned 5 or 5, 6, right? But everyone else is over here. And I mean, we know when you look at the population and where it's going, you know clearly that the minority will be the majority. As Assad said, this is what they're systematically doing is putting things in place and on every level of government to ensure that they remain in power.
Right.
This has been going on for a while. They know trends just like we, and I think that's what's happening. But going back to what you said, in terms of, they always think that these laws will not spill over, you know, opiates. You know, blacks were taking them. It became a health crisis when it affected our Caucasian counterparts, right? It's not a problem, right?
It wasn't criminalized.
And it wasn't a criminal act. And so now it's like, oh shoot, now we got to deal with this. And the thing is, even when you look at public assistance, we think that the largest population is African American. That is not true. So when Trump, when they threw out, he tried to, what was it with the court? He tried to get rid of it. But what he doesn't realize is the majority of his population. You can Google this. I'm not saying, you can Google it and you can get the stats on it. So a lot of things that we think that they're hurting us, but it shows the length of what they will go through to hurt us, right? To make sure that we don't get it without realizing that it's hurting them. But that just shows you the extent that they will go to ensure that we won't have it. It'll affect our population, and that's okay. But those are right. They're dispensable, right? You right, and that's so it's unfortunate. But and you got the very few concentrated, and they're like, okay, they're expendable. Yeah. As long as we get to them, we'll sacrifice them to ensure that.
And it shows how the myth of white supremacy is dangerous to everyone.
It's dangerous to everyone.
It is committed to perpetrating this myth that literally white folk are superior, and so anything that comes from our perspective and tells our story and tells our view is already dangerous. It's got to be dangerous. It's got to be kept out of the schools. You know, they make a monster of critical race theory here that they can't spell critical race theory. They can't spell the acronym for critical race theory, but they want to stand against it because they've got to maintain the myth of white supremacy. And so what that means is, you know, we may not be a monolith, as you say, but all of us have been negatively impacted by white supremacy in schools, in the criminal justice system, coming out of pulpits, but they have been inundated with it too. We were just talking a few minutes ago about, you know, the black face being the face of crime or being the face of this, that, or the other. But the statistics say otherwise.
Says otherwise.
White folk commit more crimes than us. They
Use more drugs,
use more drugs,
have more guns.
all of that, and any crime. I showed this in my class. I said, look at the statistics, and this is coming from U.S. departments that have never been friendly to black people. But they say if you look at arson, if you look at gang violence, if you look at drug use, if you look at prostitution, white. But it's us, literally. But it's our
We're the face of it.
But using our face as the face of then gets them to pass laws and policies that protect that mythological white supremacy. But it's literally eating all of us alive, and we have got to stand against that.
But as I was saying earlier, I hope people can. I'm gonna next chance I'll look and get the link so people can see this report. All of that was strategically done. We all work in media, and when I used to teach, I used to talk to my students about the power of suggestion. I don't think many of us really think about what that is. That is when anybody watching us or a part of this. We're watching TV one night and we're not hungry. Then a commercial for Outback Steakhouse comes on. And it's like we get hungry.
Right.
Or this is a great example. How many of us have ever heard a song on the radio we don't like? But the radio station keeps playing that song in rotation and we start singing it. Local news, the local news format, much of which now has been taken over by right wing, Sinclair Media and all that. But even before there was a Sinclair Media, in the Reagan years, local news led with black crime stories. So if you see that every night, James, black folk are criminal, 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 you start to internalize that even about yourselves and about your own people. So that's one of the things we've always been up against. And there, part of the need for reparations, part of the need for healing our community is to get over the inflicted self-hatred, because that is an aspect of enslavement. That is a vestige of enslavement. And unfortunately, some of our brothers, that's what Clarence Thomas is about. There is an extreme amount of self-hatred on the part of somebody like Clarence Thomas or Candace Owens or something like that. But something else that was said in terms of, again, how this affects the other people. Dr. King said it, that's another thing. They want us to only hear one speech that Dr. King gave.
Right.
But one of his most important speeches was on the steps of Montgomery State Capitol after the march from Selma to Montgomery, where he talked about the history of dividing black and white. And this is a Christian minister saying that after slavery, we were given the Bible. He wasn't saying it in a positive way. That's what was given to us to, placate us, make us think everything's gonna be all right. But white folks who were also impoverished, looking for economic opportunity, in a way to keep us from unifying, which is what Reverend Barber's been trying to do. He's gone back to that with the Poor People's Campaign. Dr. King died in that campaign to try to overcome those differences. Wait a minute, there's more poor white folks than poor black folks. Y'all need to be for ending poverty too. And I'm like, really? White folks started loving Dr. King, and that's why Hoover had to take him out. Now, I'm gonna come back to Hoover in a minute. But what Dr. King said in Montgomery was that after the Civil War, during that period of Reconstruction, to ensure that poor, economically deprived whites and poor, economically deprived African Americans coming out of enslavement didn't unify, gave us the Bible and gave white folks Jim Crow, which he described was a psychological bird to feed their empty stomachs so that at least they could say, well, I'm doing bad, but I'm not doing as bad as the black man. And so what our enemies have done, they've gone back to that playbook. They did it. You mentioned the Southern strategy.
Yes.
That has been the strategy throughout, to divide and to hide from people the reality of the situation so that white folks really are in denial. And I'm gonna say this now, shut up for a minute. You know how tragic it is we've been dealing with Chicago. We deal with gun violence in our community every day. And tragically, Dr. Wilson talked about this, God rest her soul, how we become numb and anesthetized to it. It's just like, and we just seem helpless. Overnight, look what's happening to white people. Same thing, mass shootings every day. And it's just like, well, this is just how it is. We can't do nothing about it. And that is a part of the gun industry, the white supremacist culture in America. And I remember after the Aurora Theater shooting, I wrote an article then about how the myth of black on black violence, no other group's violence is described.
Dick Gregory
Right.
talked about that.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
The myth of black on black violence is going to set up white people to get killed because they'll become numb to it too and think that this is just what it is. This is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form. And what's interesting about Uvalde is now the tables are turned for the first time. People are not questioning the police. Why do you do more? And police don't like that. So wait a minute, hold it. We didn't shoot these kids. They're not even talking about
You
shooting
stood in that
anymore.
hallway for 90 minutes while they were the little
Shut up.
kids, right? The little kids calling 911. Little
Little
kids.
kids
calling
know not to call
911.
And that
911.
changed the
But you
story
know
3,
what?
4, 5 times.
And that
over
changed the
and
story
over to
constantly.
protect that myth.
How
But
do you stand out there with
Hearing the shots,
Right.
obviously.
10-year-old, 9-year-old?
But then not just
Call
standing
for that
out there. There's footage. There's pictures taken of the police in the building.
Yes.
9-10 minutes after the shooter got there, so they were in the same space
You
for
you
an
mentioned Dick
hour.
Gregory. What would he say? They would break it down. So you talked about school thing, and you know, this one thing where I think they will look at, and there's some thoughts about this. All the school shootings that happen primarily in public schools. Is there not a war on public schools? Is this not another way to get people, get their kids out of public schools, to destroy that as another democratic institution that's in this society, the right to a free public education? So soon later people will say, I don't want to take my kids to public schools no more because that's where they're gonna get shot up.
But you know, it's interesting. We talked about being silent, and you notice the Republicans wholly silent on that. And so again, it's the sacrifice of those 19 students and that teacher to keep these rights to bear arms.
Well,
So
you
we're-
know,
Jim Crow.
so
Eat that
that's
bird.
what it is. We'll sacrifice them. We'll be quiet so that we can keep the rights. And now our children are being sacrificed.
And you can eat
They're
that
being
bird.
sacrificed.
We give you that bird to eat, Jim Crow.
well,
And that's better than, you know, you can take the other stuff.
and dissenting opinion on this gun decision yesterday. Justice Breyer said there have been 277 mass shootings this year. 277. Think about that. That's more than one per day. That's every day it's happening. Mass shootings. And remember, as I think
You
you
mean
pointed
this
out
year?
earlier, this year,
And you're saying mass, so that means
Mass.
reported over 4.
over
Right.
4. Like
We're
you
not
said
talking about the
earlier.
other ones.
Right,
Right.
we're not talking
We're not
about
individual.
anything under
Right.
3. We're not talking.
Right.
They're
We're
not, they
not
don't get
talking
reported.
about suicides either,
There you go.
because that
Yep.
is killing a lot of white
Lot of-
kids. White
It
kids
is,
too.
actually, that's-
Lots of
yeah.
white
You
kids
said
are
black women know
suicide.
everything. See,
I told
No.
you.
See that?
Suicides.
Right.
And then
Suicides.
this one, she knows.
And
a
they're
lot more
using
than
guns,
she
by
does.
the way.
But-
They're using guns, by the way, to kill themselves. So let's sacrifice them too, right?
When there are other categories, I have to go back. There's a Twitter feed that reports every day on gun death accidents in the home. You'd be surprised how many hundreds of those have that they can still buy a gun. They don't know how to use, know how to secure it, and accidentally shoot themselves at kids' games, or
Yes,
kids accidentally
yes,
shoot each
yes.
other. So you have that. You also have situations where there are incidents of domestic violence, and not just spouse on spouse or
Right.
I mean, domestic violence happens in the home. Layers of it happen every single day, and that's the sad part about it. People going, is this fantasy in America? This home invasion pornography fantasy that America is built up.
Yes.
Somebody's coming in to get me, and then the people end up shooting each other in the house.
Each other.
9 times
Yeah.
out of
That's
10,
more
when
likely.
people bring a gun in the house, somebody else in the house, another loved one ends up either getting
Yeah.
shot through suicide, accident, or domestic violence, rather than stopping anybody from running up in the house and steal something.
Well, listen,
That's
we're
right.
we're talking here live in New Orleans, but we're talking to about there's a panel that Assad Walk is going to be on, and we've already started discussing really the basis of it, right? The antidote to racism in America. And Assad, you're going to be on that panel, and it sounds like the conversation we're having now is pretty much what's going to go on later, and it's actually it's going to be broadcast right here on the channels, the social media channels of the Black Press. Tell us a little bit more about this panel.
So full disclosure, I'm also a minister in the Shrines of the Black Madonna, founded by Reverend Albert B. Clegg Jr.
You know, you got to speak up like ministers do.
Who's known as
You know, they
known
loud.
as the father of Black theology.
right
Also
now.
African American studies teacher at UH for going on almost 20 years. And so
Yeah.
when I think about power, when I think about racism, I should say racism or white supremacy, how is the black press, black media, the antidote to that? Well, the antidote to racism is power. Because if someone is racist against you and they control an institution and can institutionally inflict their racist ways on you, you got problems. But if you have power, and power, from my perspective, comes from owning and controlling institutions. So if you have institutional power, no, they can be as racist as they want to, but I still have an institution that can feed my family, that I can get a small business loan, and I can do all the other things that I need to do in life. And so then the question becomes, what is the black press doing to move us towards institutional power? And so one thing the black press has done and must continue to do is preach truth to power and call out what the hell is going on, so that we recognize, hey, wait a minute, we cannot depend on them for our education. Like you said, someone said, oh, we got your children, we're going to take care of them. Come on now. If they make one decision today, they can make another decision tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And so I'm so glad that you had the mindset, I'm not depending on you for the welfare of my children. I got this. And that's what black folk have. We've got to come to that same conclusion, but the black press has to amplify that message, whether it's by the coverage that it gives to the Scottsboro boys, or to the Emmett Till case, or to what's going on right now, so that we know, wait a minute, we've got to approach this differently. We can't put all our eggs in trust in a basket that has been overturned by folk over and over and over again. We've got to build institutional power, and we've got to tell those good stories,
Right.
the stories of the overcoming, the stories of the persevering, and the stories of the not just Black Wall Street, because there are all kinds of Black self-determining towns all over this country. I always tell my students that you've got to read, I think it was Ralph Ginsburg's book, 100 Years of Lynching, because the mythology of lynching is white folk are trying to stop these Black men from raping white women, but really it's because this brother, and those two sisters and you were out competing white folk economically.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to, but we've got to tell those stories. We've got to tell the stories, and we've got to celebrate where we are overcoming. You came in here and you were talking about, the metaverse, and you were talking about, black tech and all that. We got to celebrate that story. We've got to be owners and have institutions where we can pass that and invest. We can pass that down to our children. And the black press, if the black press isn't telling us, where are we gonna get that story from?
Well, so James Wright has been in school, raising his hand over here. So go ahead, James. Well, want some water?
No, I'm fine.
We
I'm
don't want
fine.
you,
Because this discussion is really getting me started. That's why I'm doing all this coughing. Let me say that this discussion
You're
that
COVID
Mark,
negative, right?
I'm COVID negative. I got my booster 2 weeks ago. Mark, I'm not going to disagree with Mark, but I'm going to agree with him in a very funny sort of way. Same thing with Aswar. This is a new discussion for us, because mainstream, we've been taught since 1954 that we must integrate with white people. This is what this thing about busing, this is what this thing about public accommodations, even in terms of voting rights. So we want to have the right to be able to be a legislator with the white people. We want to have a right to go to their restaurants and their hotels and to be treated as equal. And the discussion is that we want to be just like them. Now, this is what, and I'm not talking about the crazy people, Candace Owens and folks like that. We're talking about the American mainstream Black person who wants to get along with white people, who wants to be with white people, and those who are kind of the extreme, they want to really be white psychologically. This is what Mark and Oswald are basically saying, that is wrong. So not only are we're going back to the type of thought that we needed to do in prior to the Brown versus Board of Education. I'm going to say it right now. I love Charlie Houston. I love Thurgood Marshall. I love Spotswood Robinson, and I love Constance Baker Motley. But I think they might have been wrong in terms of trying to press us with white people so we could be little white people. Maybe the strategy should have been truly equitable. Maybe it should have been equitable, but
Jay,
not that.
You know, if we were on the football field in the NFL, there'd be a flag thrown on that play. But let me just say this though, and I'm gonna, because Marilyn's an educator, right? Schools today, public schools today, are more segregated than they've ever been, right? And so what James just said, even with Brown versus Board, it's truly gone the other way anyway, right?
Yeah, it has. Because I mean, that's really packed, right? To unpack that part, that's gonna take a minute. I'm just like, how do you get into that and kind of dissect that? Because I mean, I do see your point. Like we need the and both and, right? But I think there was something significantly lost, and I think we all know, like when school integration happened, we did lose what we had, but we got what we wanted. So for me as an educator, I support, and I have always taught in public schools.
Right.
But I've come around to wanting private vouchers, and let me tell you why. Because I want to be able to own or run my own school and do it the way I want to do it for my kids. Like having sort of like a K-12 HBCU system and going back and starting again, because as much, I mean, I've scratched the surface, and the arguments that we're making about public education, we've been making them since 60s. I mean, in Chicago, we had a huge protest, Black protest walkout in the 60s, and I looked at the footage, and it's exactly the same arguments that we're making today. And I'm just like, you know what? Give me the ability to fund my school, and where I can teach Black history the way it should be taught. I can teach the values the way I can be taught, they should be taught, and watch things change. Because the system we already know is working against us every time we turn, even in Black democratic cities like Chicago. Chicago's run on the face by Black people.
But even in that city and all across the country,
Yes.
and you talked about since the 60s, public education has been underfunded. There's been the war on public education didn't just start just a couple of years ago, and so it's like you starve it and then it dies, but you're always pointing your finger. Look at you underfunded. You don't give it the money, and you say, look how horrible it is. During the civil rights movement, everyone talks about Brown versus the Board of Education, but no one talks about the fact that there was a war to move public dollars to these private Christian schools, so that white folk could keep their children separate from Black people. And there were some school districts that literally shut down the public school system because that's how much they wanted to keep their children separate from our children.
Yeah.
So, if we say we're talking about public school system being, it's horrible, it's just that it's never been given a chance to actually succeed. So
But
that's
why has it changed? You said 1950. Has it really changed? No. When you look, so now you're talking. When I said the judicial system, democracy, judicial, legislative, now regulatory. Because you're talking, that's education. Those are the regulatory agencies. And so, has it really changed? I'm gonna go biblical on you.
Come on.
What's being developed now is a stronghold. What we're seeing now, that's the stronghold. It hasn't really changed. They burned down Greenwood because of jealousy, right? So let's just imagine. Come with me for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine if Greenwood and if Durham, if they had allowed to continue to exist, where we would be today, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that also is part of the whole. So now what we have is a stronghold, right? And biblically, when there's a stronghold, now what you have to do, right? It takes more to come out of it. You know, it's a bloody battle, and
Well,
it has to be taken by force. You know,
Well,
so yeah.
let me highlight this two more comments here. And I think David was responding to you, James. He says that I don't want to be with white people. I want to fully exist within the society I live. And Gregory Muhammad says self-independence, and that is the key. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I would agree with that, but I think it's a little more complicated in terms of what happened in 1954. And Dr. King, not to quote him again, he talked about they ultimately realizing that we were integrated into a burning house. And what he meant by that, their system is flawed. It was never said or written down that integration was for us to abandon our institution. But I think the mistake that was made was that we did not have a full understanding of what that meant and holding on to self-determination simultaneously. So we are all victims of, and this is what we face here in the Black press, just bring it right back home. We have, because of the vestiges of enslavement and PTSD and still self-hatred, we have this white man's ice is colder syndrome. And so, I'm saying folks making them comments, that's fine. But, charity begins at home. If you want to be independent, if you want to be self-determining, support and uphold the Black press. Even some of these media, social media, that people are watching this wonderful program on this morning, discriminate against us and deliberately send disinformation to our community. What Let It Be Known is doing right now is trying to break through that. Now, Let It Be Known should have 1 million viewers right now.
And make it plain.
Thank you. Let It Be Known should
Yes.
have 1 million viewers right now. Okay. The only reason it doesn't is because Zuckerberg's algorithm knocks this down. Now, we were on here talking like Candace Owens. They'd have
We'd be
1
virtual.
million impressions. I just want to be clear on
It's true,
that.
and it's
You see what I'm saying?
true.
So let's be clear about that. So all of you watching, if we're going to be self-determining, we need to support broadcasts like this. We need to support Black newspapers, Black press that support our information. In terms of what happened with the whole education piece, see, I think it was made clear once white flight occurred and once the integration of schools really became de facto segregation. And I was part of this movement, 35, 40 years ago. There was the African-centered education movement. What you just described, but we decided, wait a minute, this is our public tax money. We can just take over our own school systems and have African-centered education.
Right.
Big move, Dr. Conrad World, Dr. Charles C. McIntyre, Dr. John Henry Clark, people like that. And he said that was the movement. Now, that was watered down into multicultural education. And then they got rid of all of it. There was not even, you couldn't even do any of it anymore. And now where are we now? There's an attack on critical race theory, which really is only taught at the law school level.
Right. Right.
Here's the funny thing about it is what we have, this is why we must believe in ourselves. We were the first civilization. We were the first thinkers, the first scientists, the first doctors, the first architects, the engineers. We built the pyramids. We were the first people to write, put pen to paper. We were the first people to interpret humankind's relationship with God. If we would just believe, see, we didn't know that in 1984.
Right.
Everybody in 19, Thurgood didn't know. Thurgood had not heard, you are a God coming out of Africa. So you see the people anything? Now the Black press was revolutionary because there was a paper called the Afro-American. Folks still weren't ready to say that yet. That was groundbreaking. We didn't start embracing African American until the late 80s. As Jesse Jackson said the same thing. Afro-American in 1900, they said Afro-American. Duke Ellington wrote a song in the 20s called Black Beauty. Nobody understood these. We didn't embrace Black as beautiful until James Brown said it. So a lot of, but Duke Ellington said in 1920. So the point is, sometimes we're a little late in terms of realizing who we are. And so if we had known that, we would have gone in with a sense of power. And also known this Elvis movie coming out.
What month? What month is June?
Juneteenth.
No, it's Black Music.
Black Music. Right. Oh, you're right. So the Elvis movie's coming out. But you said something earlier about critical race theory, great replacement theory. They steal everything from us. They steal our music, they steal our lyrics. They couldn't come up with original names for their thing. CRT, they had to make a GRT. Still stealing stuff. Our own lyrics, making it fit their piece so they can promote what they're trying to do. So if we would but understand And I think we did. I think most of us now late understand it, but if we had only known that in 1954, we would have been lucky.
So,
I would just
Yes.
add this.
Yes.
all right, real quick, go ahead, Asad, real quick.
Maybe most of us didn't know, but there was always some of us, because David Walker in 1828 was talking about Hannibal, the great general, was an African, was talking about black
That's right.
folk were the
That's
ones
right.
that built the pyramids. And then Marcus Garvey and through Albert B. Clegg were saying we need institutional power. We need to control our own stuff.
Yeah, and that was the motto of the Black Press when it began in 1827. We wish to plead our own cause, and this is what we're doing 195 years later. So today, check out his panel. Asad is on the panel on the Antidote to Racism. You can watch it live on the social media channels of the Black Press. This is what we're doing, y'all. Amplifying our voices for freedom, justice, equality, and equity. Again, the 195th anniversary of the Black Press of America. Tonight, first of all, you mentioned Afro-American. Marilyn said that was so cool to have a paper called The Afro-American. She loves it. Dr. Draper, we applaud Dr. Tony Draper and the Afro. They won big at the Messenger Awards last night. The Final Call won big. You know, of course, St. Louis American always wins. That's such a great paper. We have such great newspapers in this family of Black press. But join us tonight here live. We're going on the red carpet tonight, 6:30. Y'all can tune in 6:30 live. We're going to be on the red carpet for our Legacy and Lifetime Achievement Awards, the biggest night of the year for the Black press. And tonight, we're going to honor one of our great publishers, Bobby Henry from the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Auntie Maxine is being honored tonight. Maxine Waters, the great representative out of California. And also Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, is going to be honored tonight. But to cap it all off, the one and only Stephanie Mills. And you guys can watch that live tonight. Just start with us on the red carpet at 6:30. We'll be bringing you like these wonderful women. They're going to be sporting their gear, you know, they're great stuff. But join us live. We really appreciate you watching. Let it be known. Special edition tonight, 6:30. All of us going to be there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tonight.